Job, Satan and God, the test that destroyed everything. What if you woke up tomorrow and your entire life had been erased overnight, not disrupted, not changed, but gone? And then you were told it wasn't random thing. It was a test from God to prove a point to Satan. Would you still believe in God? Would you still call him good? And beneath all of it lies the question that refuses to soften. Why would an all-loving God allow an innocent man's world to collapse just to prove a point? This is the story of Job. But more than that, it is a story that forces us to question suffering, justice, faith, and the nature of God. Because Job is not just a religious narrative. It is a thought experiment about reality itself. The setup: a man who breaks the usual logic. According to the opening of the book of Job, he is described as a righteous man. He fears God. He avoids evil. He is wealthy, respected, and surrounded by family. In the normal moral framework, Job seems to be exactly the kind of person who should be protected by the system of justice. Good behavior should lead to good outcomes. That is the expectation most of us have. Do good, and good should come back to you. But then the story breaks that logic. And it doesn't happen on earth. It happens in a scene beyond human observation. The heavenly argument. The story shifts to a heavenly setting. God points to Job, and Satan challenges the reason behind Job's faith. The argument is essentially this: does Job really love God, or does Job love what God gives him? Think about that for a moment. If someone has money, family, health, security, and success, how do we know whether their faith is genuine? Would they still believe if all of those things disappeared? Satan's argument is that Job's faith is conditional. Take away the blessings, and Job will turn against God. And then something terrifying happens. God allows Job to be tested. The experiment. Job's life begins collapsing in waves. His livestock are taken, his servants are killed, his wealth disappears. And then comes the news that would destroy almost anyone. Job's children are gathered together when a great wind strikes the house. The building collapses, and his children die. Stop there, because this is where the story becomes extremely difficult. Why would children have to die because their father's faith was being tested? They didn't make the challenge. They weren't the ones arguing with Satan. They weren't the ones trying to prove anything. So why were they caught in the middle? And another question: if God already knew Job's character, why was a test necessary in the first place? If God is all-knowing, wouldn't he already know how Job would respond? And if God knew Job would remain faithful, what was the purpose of allowing the suffering? These aren't small questions. They are at the heart of the book of Job. Job's response. Despite everything that happens, Job doesn't immediately curse God. He mourns, he grieves, but he continues to acknowledge God. Then Satan goes further. The possessions weren't enough. The family wasn't enough. Satan argues that Job will abandon God if his own body suffers. Again, the test continues, and Job's suffering becomes even more severe. But here's what makes Job so interesting. He doesn't simply sit quietly and accept everything. He asks questions. He protests. He demands answers. And honestly, isn't that what many of us would do? When something terrible happens, don't we ask, why me? What did I do? Why would God allow this? Where is God when I need him? Job asks those questions too. The friends. Job's friends arrive, but instead of truly comforting him, they try to explain his suffering. Their reasoning is simple. If Job is suffering this badly, he must have done something wrong. But Job refuses to accept that explanation. He knows his own character. He knows he hasn't committed some secret evil that explains everything. So Job demands an answer from God. And eventually, God responds. God's response. But here's the surprising part. God doesn't simply explain, "Job, this is exactly why I allowed you to suffer." Instead, God questions Job about the complexity and scale of creation. Where were you when the foundations of the earth were established? Can you control the sea? Can you command the morning? Do you understand everything happening in creation? The response shifts the focus from, "Why did this happen?" to, "How much of reality can a human being actually understand?" And that's where the story becomes philosophical. Because maybe the book of Job isn't giving us a simple explanation for suffering. Maybe it's challenging our assumption that we can always see the entire picture. But the questions don't disappear. Job's fortunes are eventually restored. He receives new wealth. He has another family. His life is rebuilt. But here's the uncomfortable part. Does restoration erase loss? If someone loses a child, can another child simply replace them? Can new blessings erase old pain? Can rebuilding a life undo what happened in the past? Those questions remain, and that's one reason Job is such a powerful story. It refuses to give us the simple idea that good people always experience good things. The big question. Job's story raises a question that humans have wrestled with for thousands of years. Why do innocent people suffer? And an even harder one. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why allow suffering that seems unnecessary? The book of Job doesn't give us an easy answer. Instead, it leaves us with tension. A righteous man suffers. His children die. His wealth disappears. His friends misunderstand him. And God eventually speaks, but doesn't give Job the straightforward explanation he was demanding. Maybe that's why this story continues to provoke debate. Because Job doesn't simply ask us to believe. It asks us to think, to question, to wrestle with uncomfortable ideas about faith and justice. And perhaps the most powerful question isn't, would you believe in God if everything was going well? It's this, what happens to your faith when everything goes wrong? Imagine losing your wealth, your security, your family, your health, and knowing that you never did anything to deserve it. Would you still trust God? Would you question Him? Would you walk away? Or would you, like Job, demand an answer while still refusing to let go? That's the mystery of Job. Not simply a story about Satan testing a man's faith, but a story about what happens when human beings try to understand suffering in a world they cannot fully comprehend. And maybe that's why Job still matters today. Because sooner or later, almost everyone asks some version of the same question. Why did this happen to me? And sometimes the hardest answer is the one we don't want to hear. We may not always know, but the question itself remains. If everything you loved was taken away in a test you never agreed to, would you still trust? Think about it. The Thinker's Lens. And if you enjoy stories that make you question what you thought you knew about the Bible, history, religion, and the mysteries behind them, subscribe to The Thinker's Lens. Here, we don't just tell stories, we ask questions, we explore ancient mysteries, controversial ideas, forgotten history, and the difficult questions people are sometimes afraid to ask. So if you want to think deeper, question more, and see these stories from a different lens, subscribe to The Thinker's Lens. Because sometimes The most interesting part of a story isn't the answer. It's the question it leaves behind.